Morales. He lowered the volume of his breathing. Gustavo just raised his hand so that no one would move, and the figure slowly appeared. Like someone coming out to see if anyone has arrived from the bushes. A thin white silhouette with a shawl that wasn't really a shawl, but something longer, like a seamless garment. She walked slowly, as if wrapped in it, from head to toe. Without any intention of coming closer, she stopped in front of the little chapel, right where there was a crucifix. Excited, he turned toward them, not quickly or dramatically, but like someone who hears their name. Good evening, everyone. Please welcome to this special about stories of soldiers, military personnel, and armed forces. It's a topic you really like, as you showed in a recent survey where we asked you what our next special episode should be about. That's why we've been gathering the most chilling stories on this topic that we've received recently, as well as some that we searched for in the archives. And finally, they're going to be shared. So we hope you really enjoy this episode, that you're in a good mood, that everything is going well, and if not, let this be the excuse to let go of any problem that's keeping you up at night, at least for a while. Here, the only good reason not to sleep is because of the fear from tonight's stories. Oh, and by the way, don't leave before the episode ends, because at the end we have the winners of these first 10 autographed books, and of course, there will be more stories. So turn off the light now and let yourself go, because it's starting. Night Stories. Hello, community. My name is Janet, and I have a 5-year-old boy. I'm no longer with my son's father, but we have a very good relationship. He is a soldier, and the last time he came to see us, he told us something that I think is worthy of night stories. You see, they were stationed for several months in a violent, dangerous area. Every day they were on alert from the first light until nightfall, and even while sleeping, they were ready for whatever might happen. Suddenly there was an uproar over a patrol with which they had lost communication. They hadn't reported anything unusual to them. No confrontation, no presence of suspects, nothing. The patrol had only reported the area they were entering, and then nothing else. Just silence. Strangely, the silence felt even more unsettling. What if they had reported walking into an ambush or something similar? That simple disappearance raised alarms, and they sent a good part of the personnel to look for the missing patrol. That's when the worst happened to Esteban, my child's father. Well, in the middle of a road, as they passed by a ravine, they noticed something strange, a smell of death, of old death, that caught their attention. Even though they were looking for their companions, they couldn't ignore what they noticed, what they smelled, because they already know when the death they smell is human. And there, near that ravine, there were definitely dead Christians. It was nighttime, and the area was dangerous. So they reported the discovery and said that a couple of members would go down to check. Meanwhile, the others stood guard on the road, and one of those who went down was Esteban. Right away, he realized that a car had fallen there because of the broken tree branches, but it was also clear that it had happened weeks before, since the broken branches had sprouted again after being down for a while. They noticed that there was an army truck down below, and when they reached it, they found the bodies of several comrades, already decomposed from the time that had passed. Now then, the strange thing, community. The incredible thing about this is that the comrades in the truck were the same ones who had disappeared just hours before. However, both the condition of the bodies and the truck and its surroundings showed that they had been there for at least a couple of weeks. At least they didn't believe what they were seeing, nor did their superiors. When they arrived at the scene, people from other ranks showed up, people they almost never saw. Key civil authorities arrived, along with a team of experts and forensic specialists from the capital. No one understood what they were seeing, and above all, no one could talk about what had happened. What was the press supposed to say in a situation like that, or the families of the victims? I don't know what they told the families to give them the remains without letting them see them. I'm not sure if they were cremated and given the ashes, or if everything was just resolved with money. But those who got to the truck first, the ones who saw everything, were given a month off. Esteban still hasn't recovered or understood what he saw, and I can't believe how much he's aged in just a few months. He says it's all due to what he saw. That experience will stay with him forever. You can tell from his eyes he witnessed something shocking. The following story, dear community, might be one of the most unsettling we've told in a long time. And although, like all of them, it has that paranormal element hard to believe that maybe goes beyond ghosts or witches. Remember that we are all skeptics according to our experiences, that we all start believing a little more as we go through life. And if you're lucky enough to still be a skeptic, take advantage of it. We continue with this special episode of Military Stories. My Uncle Gabo was in the military. The story I want to share with you, community, is one he told me once when I was about 11 or 12 years old. Back then, he and his wife lived in a little house that my parents rented right behind ours. It was for a few months an emergency while they caught up on some debts. But I remember well that I really enjoyed that time because my uncle was always playing music for me, introducing me to bands and singers I didn't know. A time in my life that shaped many of my tastes, and I also remember that time. Because of the stories he used to tell me, he was a man full of anecdotes, and among them there were some that were inexplicable, supernatural. As I told you at the beginning of my story, he was in the military. And during those years, a couple of completely inexplicable events happened to him. But the most shocking one, he only told me once. And later, when I asked him to repeat the story in front of some of my cousins, he preferred not to do it. It was hard for him to tell it, and he had only done it with me in confidence, nothing more. This happened in the 80s during a mission that took his troop into the mountains between the Mexican states of Michoacán, Jalisco, and Guanajuato. If anyone watches the news in Mexico, they'll know that those states now have very dangerous areas with a lot of organized crime. But back then it wasn't like that, not so much, and his small troop was moving forward on reconnaissance missions, looking for a trail, that trail. They had information that someone was hiding in those places where no one lived anymore, where no one could live. In the mountains, in the most inhospitable part of the region, they moved forward, having left the last villages half a day behind. One early morning, it was his turn to take the last watch. He woke up to look after the troops during the final hours before dawn. Braulio, the youngest in the group, who for some reason admired him a lot and was always following him, also woke up, even though it wasn't his turn for guard duty, and decided to keep him company. The place was peaceful. The silence up there was absolute. They doubted the clues they were following, so they were somewhat unconcerned, going along because they were following orders, but not really because they believed they would find anything. But as my Uncle Gabo always told me, things happen for a reason, and I believe they were up there for a reason. One that might have been more important than the original reason they were sent. It was around 4, almost 5, when it was still night, but not so dark anymore and more blue, when, from his lookout post, he and Braulio were looking at a small plateau in front of them, which led to small paths that eventually, after dozens of kilometers, led to villages in the area. They were talking quietly there, when suddenly Braulio fell silent. In the middle of his sentence, he stopped, stood up, and looked out toward the plateau. But he went flat on the ground, as if he had heard something. My Uncle Gabo did the same thing. Trusting the boy's instincts and sharp hearing, he drew his weapon and watched carefully. In the distance, you could hear someone approaching, someone who was coming while singing. Someone watched very closely. They could hear him, but they still couldn't see him. But someone was coming, someone who was singing, completely carefree, someone. And finally, they could see him coming out from among the branches that bordered the path and stepping onto the plateau with short grass, where they could now observe him clearly. When he described what happened next to me, my Uncle Gabo tried to hide the fact that his eyes were filling with tears. He paused the story, stopped for a moment, took a breath, and then told me the following. He looked through the sight of his weapon and saw a man moving forward, dancing as if in a child's dance, but it made him move forward, and as if everything was part of a macabre dance. He was wearing a costume. His clothes were very loose and seemed to be covered in moss, like the kind that grows on stones. As if he were wearing a serape, a poncho made of dull green moss. Even though they were a couple dozen meters away, when that strange man entered his field of vision, he brought with him a stench of dampness that crept up his nose. He had a strange cap and also a hat that he described as a cowboy hat, but it was crushed and dirty, and with the brims pointing to the sides, instead of to the front and back like they're usually worn. And there was something else. That man was wearing a mask, a medieval jester's mask, a mask that looked like old dirty porcelain with black eyes. When he entered the plateau, when he walked in several meters, they could see that someone was coming behind him. A boy following a few meters behind, moving in the same strange dance, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. And then another and another and another and another and one more. The 6 small figures followed him, dancing at a distance in clothes that couldn't protect them from the cold of the mountains. My Uncle Gabo, with a silent gesture, asked Braulio to very carefully go wake up the others. He observed each of the children, from the youngest to the one at the back. He moved forward one by one until he reached the first, and then he turned his gaze back to the jester. When he did, he noticed that the jester had already stopped and was staring directly at him with a face that looked furious, and both things were completely impossible. My Uncle Gabo was among the branches in camouflage, not making a single sound. It was impossible for him to have seen it, but it was clear that he did. It also seemed impossible to him to see a look of fury on a mask he had just seen seconds before, and that didn't have it. He says that maybe that's a confusion of memory. What he does remember is a signal from that thing that made all the kids run off in every direction, toward the bushes, toward the ravines, wherever they were going, or back. And he also remembers that he tried to point out when he turned his gaze, that thing was now also running toward the bushes. He fired. He fired, hitting it between the back and the shoulder, but that thing kept running until it disappeared from sight. The troops were there in a second, running toward the plateau, disappearing among the bushes, among the ravines, trying to catch the children who were hiding in that macabre dance. They did it as if they had been waiting for a signal to run and go after them, although the reality was that just a few seconds ago they were asleep, and that it seemed to be one, they were soldiers. Black men without sun. What did she... Ofufa, she was trembling. The mountain air with that icy air. The children didn't know what they were doing there. They had no idea how they had gotten to that place or what that was, what they were following. Nothing. When they were asked where they were from, where they came from, they all mentioned different towns that were hours apart from each other. They all remembered going to sleep the night before without feeling anything strange, without experiencing anything unusual. They were all crying from nerves, trying to understand why they had suddenly woken up in the middle of the mountain, being caught by soldiers among the branches, among the bushes. A helicopter came for them a few hours later, and the troops were instructed to return. They wanted to keep searching for the man, the jester, and the missing boy, but they were assured that helicopters would be sent to continue combing the area. My Uncle Gabo couldn't stop thinking about that look, about what he felt when that thing turned to look at him. A look that he felt pierced through his chest and his soul. He also thought about that precise shot, about how it entered that man's back without phasing him, without stopping him in the slightest, despite the caliber of the weapon. He always thought about that poor boy, the youngest one, whom nobody ever heard from again. Because of that experience and other more earthly ones, but just as tough, my Uncle Gabo understood that he didn't have what it took to make a career in the army. He wasn't as tough as he needed to be. The things that happened stayed with him for a long time, and as soon as he had the chance, he requested his discharge. He then looked for the quietest life he could find as a merchant, running a stall, one of those stalls set up in markets, in the street markets that are set up every day in a different part of the city. And although it was a profession that, during tough times, made him go through difficult moments, like the one that led him to live in the little house my parents rented, he never had to face the terrors, the horrors that are out there again, whether very close to us or far away in the mountains. I'm telling this story not because I didn't want to before, but because my uncle passed away in October. I've been thinking about him a lot, and I feel that even though he was very shy about sharing these experiences, this is a way to remember him, to keep his memory alive, with me and now with you. Thank you for your attention. Community, it's time for a short break, community, and also time to invite you to subscribe to this space if you haven't done so yet. 40% of our listeners are not subscribed, so don't be one of them. Go ahead and become part of the community, Relatos de la Noche. And of course, if you're in a good mood, leave a comment as well. Give us a thumbs up, a 5-star rating. That's the best way to help us, to let us know we're on the right track and that you enjoy the episodes. Before we continue, let me tell you that if you're looking for an affordable but meaningful Christmas gift, you can still find it in some bookstores. My book, Tales of the Night, is very easy to read, even though they're stories. It's written in a way that's similar to the language of this podcast. It's direct and easy. Even if you give it to someone who doesn't read much, they'll get through it easily. You'll see, and from what I've been told, they'll really enjoy it. Is it a good first book for someone to start reading and then move on to more horror stories or classics of literature? I don't know. That's exactly how I started reading, with books of horror stories, and eventually I became an avid reader. And, well, if you can't find it in bookstores, I'll leave the links in the description. Remember that it's available in Mexico, the United States, Spain, and Chile. And now, after my usual mention, let's continue because there are still many night tales left. Tonight, my name is Jose Armando. I'm a Spanish teacher at a rural school. And I'll share with you some of the stories that the children have written in exercises, tales, and legends from their families. There's not much to do around here. You're either a teacher, a soldier, or a drug dealer. We don't have more opportunities because farming isn't done anymore. My cousin Gustavo is a soldier, like his uncles and his grandfather. He doesn't usually exaggerate. He always speaks as if things were instructions, reports, or checklists to complete. Part of his military upbringing comes from his mother's side of the family. That's why, when we started talking about what happened in the mountains that early morning, his voice sounded different from how he usually speaks. Not forced or firm, just tired, as if what he saw he didn't even want to remember it anymore, but he couldn't get it out of his head either. The patrol order was simple. Check the perimeter of the area where there had been reports of strange movements for days. What used to be a small village was now an abandoned mining town, a handful of houses half collapsed for decades. Sheet metal roofs bent by the wind, and a chapel so small it looked like a storage shed. No one had been there for many years, too many. The rumors about what caused the abandonment varied depending on who told the story. Paramilitary groups, disputes, disappearances, and other accounts that were no longer just rumors. The truth is, it wasn't because of the closure of the mine that formed the town, because that one had been completely shut down a couple of decades earlier, and the town had remained there. The convoy that went was small. Only 2 trucks arrived at dawn, because the commander said that during the day you couldn't hear anything. That the sun deceives you? At night, on the other hand, the true sound of places seeps through, the one that lingers among branches and rooftops. Gustavo had never been in those mountains, but the mountains felt heavy, enormous, still, as if they didn't want company, as if they didn't like anyone wandering around there. First, they walked along the dirt road and found nothing, just an old tire over there, a broken chair, a bicycle without wheels next to a tree, and becoming part of it. The kind of abandonment that doesn't feel recent, but very old, as if the place itself had also forgotten that someone once lived there. At 3:40, he and Morales, a thin corporal but a real chatterbox, went a few meters ahead. They weren't looking for anything in particular, just following protocol, checking windows, inspecting doors, shining the flashlight without going inside. When they reached the last house on the road, an entire wall had collapsed, exposing the inside. The flashlight barely managed to illuminate a wall with faded religious prints, and a skinny cat crossed the room unhurriedly. Who knows how long it had lived there? Who knows where it had come from? Everything was so still that I started to consider pulling back the unit and marking the perimeter when, without warning, the radios blared at full volume. They weren't clear voices, nor static either. It was like a broken attempt at speech. Gustavo said that the first thing they thought was that it was another squad arriving, but nothing in the sound had a human cadence. Even so, they responded and no one answered. It wasn't until they heard the first sound outside that they realized they weren't alone. It was something like a song, but without melody, like a low humming made to oneself. It didn't come from ahead, but from the trees. It was a single voice, but they couldn't tell if it was a woman, a man, an old person, or a young one. It couldn't be identified. Morales lowered the volume of his breathing, and Gustavo just raised his hand so that no one would move. And they saw how the figure appeared little by little, like someone coming out to see if anyone had arrived from the bushes. A thin white silhouette with a shawl that wasn't really a shawl but something longer, like a seamless garment. She walked slowly as if wrapped in it from head to toe. Without any intention of coming closer, she stopped in front of the little chapel, right where there was a rusted Christ figure. She turned toward them, not quickly or dramatically, but like someone who hears their name. Her face was covered, they didn't know with what. A mask, not a veil, but it wasn't bearskin either. It was something in between, too pale, but enough to hide her face, her features. My cousin Gustavo said that the strangest thing wasn't the figure, but that no one gave the order to aim their weapons. And even so, everyone did it as if their bodies had decided on their own. Alone, no instructions, no command shout. The figure raised its head toward nothingness, toward the mountain, and after that action the forest responded. The wind could be heard moving the branches, even the heaviest ones. The radio started sounding again, this time clearly. Fall back. It wasn't the voice of anyone familiar, no name, no code, just the order. Morales swore later that the voice was female. Gustavo said it was impossible to tell. The only thing they agreed on was that there was no static, that it was too clear. When they pointed at the silhouette again, it was no longer alone. Next to it, among bushes and rocks, there were two other figures. One of the recruits wanted to speak, to ask something, but no sound came out. His throat simply wouldn't obey. My cousin insisted it wasn't fear, that it was something else, deeper, as if he couldn't even find his voice. One of the figures raised their arm, as if saying goodbye, blessing them or sending them away. And then, yes, the forest spoke. It was as if the mountain itself took a deep, strong breath, just once, as if it shook the whole ground, the trees, and then silence. They withdrew calmly, since running would have admitted they didn't understand what they saw. They got into the trucks, no one spoke, my cousin just said. They didn't want to hurt us, no, but they didn't want us to stay there either. They wanted us to leave. The next morning, the report was filed with a code that no one explained. Something that means no hostile contact, no physical evidence, no casualties. The usual, what you sign when you don't want to write down the truth. My cousin Gustavo thinks that town wasn't abandoned. It's just that the mountains, what keeps people away, simply don't want any more guests. Community, we're still here. Thank you for continuing to listen to the previous story and the one that's coming next. I think they're along the same lines because they're about ghost towns, and we have a lot of those in Mexico and Latin America. For different reasons. If we look closely, deep down, they're not that different after all. We'd like to take this opportunity to ask you that if you or your family come from a town that no longer exists, try to remember stories from that place. It will do you and them good to remember it. And also, every time I pass by a place like that, I get really curious about what it looked like in other times. Full of life, full of people, and what better way to do that than through their stories. But anyway, for now, let's continue with more stories. My brother is a soldier. We're twins, meaning we were born from the same pregnancy, although we're not identical twins. Anyway, even though we're not identical, as you can imagine, we have a very special connection. In fact, this experience that I'm about to share with you, in some way, I felt it even before he told me about it. I felt that fear, that desolation of what happened that night. My brother also listens to stories of the night, but he asked me to write this story, and I will do so, respecting everything he told me. So this is for you, bro. What I'm about to tell. It happened in Oaxaca in February 2020. A detachment sent out a distress call from a ghost town, a village with just a few houses, which hadn't been inhabited by anyone for over a year. It was an area somewhat besieged by paramilitary groups who caused all the people to flee. My brother's company responded to the call. It was early morning and they found the members of the detachment locked inside one of the houses with barricades, truly terrified. Seriously scared to death. He tells me they found brave men, the kind who face death without a second thought to follow orders. Scared like children, trembling, thanking God, When they saw that their comrades arrived, everyone was scared, and only one of them managed to explain what was happening. Why were they hiding there? What had they experienced that night? The corporal told them they were on patrol in the area. That town had already been abandoned for some time, but they took a look around to make sure no one was hiding there or looting what was left in the houses. There, a skinny dog caught their attention as it approached them without fear, as if expecting water, some food, a pat on the head, anything. They felt sorry for it, thinking about how people leave in the middle of the night to save their lives and their children's lives. Sometimes the animals get left behind, and it was obvious that there were other dogs that had been left there too. He was the only one who survived, and who knows how, because it was clear he hadn't eaten in weeks. They gave him something to eat, thinking he wouldn't survive the night. They took out what they had to feed him, but they knew he wouldn't survive the night. So they decided to stay with him for a while, to pet him. They couldn't play with the poor dog because he didn't have any energy, but they didn't want to let him die. They just gave him water too, but it was too late. It seemed like he was waiting for them, because as soon as they walked with him, following what seemed to have been his home, the poor thing lay down at the entrance to sleep and never woke up again. The soldier said that he had a dog that he missed and that he couldn't help but see him in the place of that poor, abandoned animal. He thought about how much it would hurt him if his own died like that, so they decided to bury him there in what had been his home. And by doing this, by digging the hole and burying him, night fell on them. When they threw the last shovelful of dirt over him out of nowhere, they all felt something. Let's call it a hunch, but they sensed danger nearby. It was so clear that they grabbed their weapons, even though they hadn't seen anything yet, and formed a defensive position, almost without thinking. And then they heard, as if from the darkness, an abandoned house. In front of them, something seemed to be approaching. They saw something peeking out from behind old wood. The first thing they thought was that it was another abandoned dog because of the ears and the shiny eyes. But then it showed its head completely, and it was clear that it wasn't a dog. The size, the color, the ears, it was a coyote, a huge coyote, peeking out, lurking. They shouted at it, and it didn't react. Someone picked up a stone and threw it, hitting a piece of wood just a few inches from the animal's face. But it didn't flinch, not in the slightest. It didn't move at all, and that made them uncomfortable, that it wasn't scared. Coyotes generally avoid contact with humans, and at the slightest threat they run away. But not this one. On the contrary, it stood up, it let itself be seen. That's when they realized that it was no longer a coyote, it was something else. It was something that stood up on two legs like a human, and it was tall, very tall. However, the head, the arms, it was obvious that it wasn't a person, that it was a beast, but something they had never seen before, something they couldn't understand. There were shots fired into the air. The being remained still again, unfazed. They understood that if it wasn't afraid of the gunshots, it was because they wouldn't have much effect on it. One of the soldiers shouted curses. Another began to pray without thinking much about it. They retreated and took refuge in the house where they had buried the dog. They heard a movement by the door, and one of them realized that thing outside wanted to dig up the dog and fired his gun. He didn't know what they wanted the body for, but he wasn't going to let them use it for something bad or eat it, or whatever it was they wanted to dig it up for. After the shot, they saw it move away through a window, running toward the abandoned houses again. At that moment, they still didn't want to send out any warning call, It didn't seem right to them. They said they thought it was a situation they could handle on their own, but the truth is, they were embarrassed. And a few minutes later, they heard shouting, the shouts of several men, as if answering each other from one side of the town to the other, between the houses, communicating with each other. They were shouting in Mixtec, a language they knew well. They lost sight of the dirt road in front of them for a moment, and that was enough so that when they realized it, they saw that they were surrounded. There were coyotes sitting as if they were normal animals, but their size didn't match the animals from the area. They could see several of them sitting at different spots around the house. They ignored both the shouted insults and the shots fired into the air. They didn't leave either when two of the soldiers prayed from inside, asking God for protection. On the contrary, this last thing made them laugh, laughs that came from outside sounding like hyenas. Laughter that then mixed with words they couldn't understand, but which were clearly mocking their fear. For a moment there was silence, complete silence outside. It seemed like they had finally left, that they would have a chance to get out of there, to run to their truck on the outskirts of the town. But there was also doubt, because even though no one wanted to say it, no one wanted to say it out loud. They knew they were in Nahuales territory. It was well known that there were many around the area, but of course, no one believed in them. You don't believe until you have no other choice. That's what they were arguing about when one of the soldiers heard something. Something near the wall and went over. Sure, something brushed the window, but it wasn't that. When he shined his lamp, he saw a hand coming in between the planks of the door. Not a paw, not an animal's claw. A very long hand with thin fingers covered in black hair, but with human nails, and the hand was searching for the latch to open it. There were gunshots, there were radio calls, the desperate call that my brother responded to, the one that led him to find them scared to death. And maybe no one would have believed this story if it weren't for the fact that while they were being rescued, while they were listening to this story, dozens of soldiers witnessed how howls surrounded them from the darkness, as if letting them see that everything being told had truly happened. My brother arrived only to witness that story of the fear they experienced, but it was enough to scare him, to understand that something very strange was nearby. And, well, because of an experience with my grandfather, both of us have believed in the Nahuales since we were very young. It's something we believe in and respect. And that's why that tense moment, which also reminded him of so many things from our childhood, I could also feel that moment hundreds of kilometers away in another city. I felt the fear my brother experienced that night. And I understand that for many people, Nahuales are just fantasy, folklore, legends. But please pay attention to the howls at night, especially if you're alone in the middle of a small town with few people. Or even worse, if you hear them in the forest, you never know what's out there. My name is Ramiro Comunidad. I'm very glad to greet you. I already sent a story from my childhood once, but it hasn't been aired yet, and now I'm going to try with this one. I was stationed in the north, in the area more or less near Madera, Chihuahua. It was my first year in the Army. I joined, and I say this without shame because I had no other options. I can't say more about the exact location, of course, but I mention that place so you can get an idea. My mom died when I was 15. My dad isn't even worth mentioning, and the only person I had left was my grandmother, my mom's mother, over there in a little town in Sonora. Enlisting, like I said, wasn't a heroic or patriotic act for me like it is for many of my fellow soldiers. It was hunger and necessity, but she, my grandma, my second mom, hugged me as if I had chosen glory. My problem, the one I hid during the exams, was my right ear. An accident when I was a child. An infection that didn't heal properly because of an animal. An infection that didn't heal properly that I got from an animal, an insect that got in or something like that. The thing is, I can barely hear on that side. Almost nothing. And during training, that was hell. I learned to sleep with my good ear facing the squad, to turn my head just enough to pretend I was hearing full orders. Pretend I was hearing orders and breeze make him sick. It was in that first year, during the silent roll call of the Nights Without Light, when I met Iglesias, young Delgado. What can I say? A member of La No. He was over 20. His mom had died. I also have enough poetry. I learned by studying imitation, not out of affinity, but out of necessity. We were two orphans trying to make a family in there. In that detachment, the night watch was done one by one, long shifts, sometimes pointless. Well, most of the time, honestly, because there were rarely any suspicious movements or armed groups, but it was worse to let your guard down. Iglesias had to stand guard 2 nights in a row, and it was on the second night that he started reporting strange things. He didn't ask for backup, he didn't give any code announcing danger, he just spoke quietly on the radio and said, "It's upstairs." Right? Who is the soldier? Who is the woman? We all thought he had seen silhouettes, normal shadows of the dogs, but he didn't insist. She is wearing a black dress. Where do you see her? In the trees. But not on the ground. She's up there. This is what made the others nervous. Because it's one thing to see a crow among the branches, and quite another to see it up high, where only birds can reach. Or nothing. Nothing at all. Afterwards, he didn't know or didn't want to explain more. When we saw him in person, he told us exactly the same thing. Just like that. So brief, so blunt. There was a lady in the trees. And look, not even to me, and he trusted me much more than the others, did he dare to tell me anything more. On the third night, though it wasn't his guard shift, he asked to swap with someone. He either didn't want to sleep or couldn't. At 2:10 in the morning, he spoke on the radio again. His voice wasn't shaky or hysterical. It was very flat, almost calm, more than on other nights. In fact, the woman is here again. She's moving. I asked her, "What's going on?" "I'm not just looking over here. What are you drinking? What's that?" "But it's exciting. Look at the camp." Someone asked him, from what angle to calculate the visibility? From above, am I screwed? It explodes in the trees. Which tree is it in? In all of them? That was the last thing he said afterwards. Silence, simply and plainly, silence, and nothing more. When we went out to look for him, there were no signs of a fight or any incident. We didn't hear anything else, no gunshots, no footsteps, no sounds in the branches, nor did we see any tracks going into the woods. But there was something above us, up there, in the treetops. There was Iglesias, my partner, my friend Iglesias. He was curled up among the highest branches of a huge cypress, about 18 or 20 meters up. I didn't measure it, but it was impossible to climb up there. Impossible. He wasn't hanging, nailed, or tied up, just there, wedged between the branches, as if he had fallen from above and the tree had stopped him, as if he had fallen from very high up. But the doctor told us he didn't have any freefall fractures, that it was as if they had just left him up there, nothing more. But he didn't look attacked or devoured, and nothing was broken. It was as if they had placed the body up there, like an upside-down offering, said those who climbed up to bring the body down. The official report was accident. They brought him down in silence, and the captain ordered everyone to keep quiet about it. The mass was held without the body since it couldn't be delivered in time. Grandma never knew the position in which they found him, nor where. As far as I know, she didn't know anything about it. And I couldn't betray the trust of the institution to tell her. And also, what was I supposed to say? They gave us 15 days off without any explanation. The kind of break where the last thing you do is actually rest, where all you do is think and think and think. What followed wasn't just surveillance, it included special patrols too. It was something that I still find even more disturbing. A strange persistence. Every time we passed through that area, no matter if it was the dry or rainy season, someone would see her, never from the front, never up close, always above among the treetops, peeking out. The first time I saw her was one of the worst nights of my life. It was a horrible face, not just because of the appearance, a thin woman, motionless, dressed in black, with wide, furious eyes. Also because of how unnatural it was to see a human being move among the branches like a beast. Sometimes on a single treetop, as I saw her, sometimes according to the younger ones, she looked like she was duplicated in several, the same woman in several places at once without moving, just watching, as if she were waiting for the next one of us, someone else who for some reason attracted you, like she attracted him. Iglesias, my poor Iglesias. I requested my discharge a year later, not out of fear. I think it was exhaustion or tiredness, a lot of tiredness. Or I simply understood that my grandmother was the only thing I had. And even though she's proud, she didn't want to bury another grandson. Iglesias wasn't family, but he was the closest I had to a brother that year. He's not talked about. There's no plaque, no barracks with his name, nothing. In fact, hardly anyone remembers anymore. There's only one spot on the mountain where nobody wants to stand guard, and not because of what might happen down on the ground, but because of what might be waiting for you up above. What could take you? The witch, as the younger ones call her, the witch up there in the trees, the witch of the treetops. When I sleep on my side, I still put my good ear toward the door. Habit? That's what they told me in therapy, but it's not that. It's that I think about him, about churches, about the brotherhood we had, and about death, about his death. It hurts me a lot, really, to think about those last moments when he was waiting. Maybe that I could have helped him, that he trusted me and I wasn't there to help him. I think about the last thing he must have experienced, about what took him up there, about how he was the only person who touched that thing, who saw it up close. That woman who scares even the most experienced ones, and the more she scares them, the less they want to talk about her, about the woman of the trees. Thank you. Community. Before we finish this episode, as I promised, we're going to announce the winners of this giveaway, where there are five winners of photographed books for YouTube and 5 more for podcast platforms. Please remember, if you hear your name, write to us as soon as you can at mirelatodelanoche.com. It's the same email that's in the episode description, so you can send your stories. And, well, without further ado for YouTube, the winners are Karen Garcia, International Baccalaureate, 5 Post Office, Lucero, H2262. Mariela Alonso, 2732. Elizabeth LaJ, 5272 and a Dulce Maria Pablo Hernandez. On platforms, those who tagged us on Instagram and are winners of the giveaway are Rafael Zapata, who is odd RFA, Lilia Delgado, Arwani Lia Delgado, Aramanda R, G, Z, Eduardo, H, and Estefania Espiritu, and Fanny Espiritu. Here are the 10 winners. So please write as soon as possible so we can send your books wherever you are. And what's more, we're going to give away 2 more right here on YouTube. Leave us a comment and tell us the city where you live. And if you listen to us alone with your family or with friends, just mention that in your comment. You're already participating. Thank you for joining in, and thank you for helping us make this the most listened to Spanish podcast in the world. There will be another special soon, so let us know what topic you want it to be about. This was Relatos de la Noche. Greetings.